pros and cons for remote workers to live abroad. Obvious pros, because we're coming from the US, almost everywhere has a lower cost of living than we do. Even places like, at most European countries, barring places like Switzerland, which is like kind of crazy. For example, we lived in Japan for a little bit and Korea just recently. We're going back to Japan soon. At least Japan is a place that people commonly think is like very expensive, but actually when you live there, like once you get past the cost of flying there, it's very cheap to live as long as you're not going to like crazy fancy places every night. So you save a lot of money literally just on like rent, for example. Like even Airbnbs, there's a premium added to whatever the locals are paying, but it's a lot cheaper than, for example, like San Francisco or New York rent prices. Eating and just like everyday costs, a lot lower. The other main incentive, obviously, getting to travel and see the world, see different things, have that flexibility, learn a new culture, like try different things, meet new people. I don't know, all the like main things that come with travel, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's all of those things, and I think it helps you in your professional pursuits to have a wider experience in terms of interacting with other people, understanding different work styles, because I mean, for me, I've had to work with a lot of people from around the world, and I'm sure it would be very helpful to actually be there with that person to really understand like their workday looks like this, their challenges look like this, their incentives look like this, and that would make that kind of cooperation like a lot easier. So that's definitely like, I think personally, a professional pro as well.
And learning that culturally there are different reasons why people work differently in those offices, not just because you're like on video versus in person. It's like literally, for example, like I would never have known really how the Japanese work culture was until I sat in that office and like interacted with them every day.
I'm curious, would you say that generally speaking, the work culture outside of the US is more relaxed or less relaxed?
I don't think you can really answer that question in such a general term because it totally depends on which country and it depends on what kind of company. Like if it's like a very traditional conservative one or like a more progressive tech, you know, startup-y type thing. Because for example, I was working at a tech company when I went to Japan for the 2 months I lived there previously. And I would say the office was still a little stuffy, like still kind of, you know, like more rigid than I would have expected for a tech company, especially coming from like literally like the same company but in the Bay Area where it's like very chill and whatevs. But one day I like got off on the wrong floor and I was like wandering around and it was some like gasoline company, like one of the like major, for example, if it was like ExxonMobil or whatever, but like their corporate offices. And I walked around, I was like, where am I? Like it was so stuffy. It was like you could hear a pin drop. Everybody was wearing like suits and like just like deadpan and like very focused. And I was like, oh, let me find where I'm supposed to go because this is not it. So I still think there's like variance. But for example, like I don't know that you could say the same thing about like Spain or whatever. Like I don't think everyone has the same, every country has like much more stringent or much more relaxed than the US. Well, we said pros. Cons, I can speak for myself. Two main cons: unless you're in an English speaking country or you are descendant of whatever culture you have immersed into, language is probably a barrier for you for some of these places. Like I would say a lot of the countries on the list have like try to tout like English friendly, but like that's probably in pockets, you know. It's like the places that are like really trying to attract this money, but not having English be like super easily accessible to you is going to be a reality you have to face. So either you have to like just be okay with kind of like having misunderstandings all the time and like stumbling your way through, or you need to start learning the local language, at least bare minimum stuff, so that you can like skate by a little bit better. And then related to that, I think it's fairly easy to have a little bit of a like identity crisis or like anxiety kind of around not being able to fully express yourself because you don't speak the language. And depending on if you're there to like try to make friends or anything, like if you can't speak with most people, like that's gonna be really difficult unless you go to places where there are lots of expats or like there are local folks that are like interested and able to speak with people that only speak English. So that's just a reality. It's like you might find that there is a bit of like loneliness attached with it because you cannot fully like communicate.
Well, associated with that, I think probably there's definitely some like homesickness, missing your friends, missing your family associated with traveling, because I'm sure it's just not as easy to keep in contact with everybody or like make a phone call whenever you want, given the time difference.
Lots of avenues for homesickness, right? Like you're never going to find like every single type of food that you're used to eating or like products that you're obsessed with. That like my suitcase was filled with like specific, you know, like toiletries that I was like, I know I'm not going to be able to get this in Asia. You're just going to like get used to not having that kind of stuff.
I remember, so this is not really a work abroad situation, but I remember when I studied abroad in Spain, and I probably have told you this story, but one of my friends, actually the one that's in Portugal now, she's Indian, and there's no spices in the food there, and there's no sriracha stocked in the store there. So like we literally spent an entire day just looking for spicy food, and finally she found sriracha at a Asian restaurant and just ordered like a bowl of rice and poured like sriracha in it. It was so funny.
You did tell me that. It's
crazy the things that like you miss when you live abroad for an extended period of time. But actually, I wanted to ask, I also assume that working abroad, the tax situation becomes more complicated.
Yeah, it is more complicated. I think pro is that usually when you're on these like digital nomad visas, you don't owe taxes to the country that you are in.
Okay, work.
But speaking as an American, you still owe taxes to the country that you are from. That is not the case for every country. Like Spain doesn't collect taxes from Ramon when he's not in Spain, but the U.S. gonna money grab you until you're dead. So it is more complicated. There's like a potential for you to get at least part of your taxes like prorated, where you don't necessarily owe like all of the year if you've spent over 180 days outside of the country. So there's some like technicalities, but like your domestic US taxes do get a little bit more complicated when you live abroad. But most of these countries, you don't then owe them taxes. They just want your money that you spend there while you're there. I think it depends on what kind of visa you're on. Like I think if it was like a business visa or something, it's different.